Tēnā tātou katoa e hui mai nei. Tuatai ka mihi ake ki a koe karania and mau anō I tuwhirita tātou nei hui. And to listen to your kofo this morning, Robin, very succinctly has summed up for us the purpose of our HuiE and some of the desires we have around how we can collaboratively explore together practice that is impactful and good for our communities. And so I'm not going to be too much longer. My name is Kate Charrington, no Ngāti Hine in the far north and from Bluff in the far south. And it is my privilege to have been alongside the journey with many of you on this call, either from community or from philanthropic organisations. The privilege of listening to and gathering in your insights around how we can be more equitable, what we're doing to learn more, what are we doing to re-indigenize, not only just decolonise practices across philanthropy, etc., etc. So I guess I have the joy today of holding some of the conversation. And so before we move on, as part of this mihi, the tokorima, the famous five that are gathered here today on the call to help us instigate and get our heads going, the five speakers, I just want to mihi to you all, to the attributes, to your skill. Those are the pumanoa and your pukinga that you bring to this conversation today. And e te whānau, those of you that have gathered from afar over your lunch hour, from all four winds at the moment of Aotearoa, tēnā koutou katoa, you've taken the time to spend with us today as well. But getting back to our speakers, look, no ngā tai whā, I said this, they're from the four winds. We have people coming in at 1 o'clock in the morning from England. We have our brother from Ghana country, South Australia. We have Niall. We have people, we have three of us from Te Waipounamu in the house, so from the top, you know, Te Tauiho Ngā Waka, from Te Ōtautei and through to Tititea, Wanaka. We're from all over. So I imagine that the discussion will be just as diverse and exciting and hopefully meaningful and helpful and useful to all of us on this kōrero today. So nau mai ki tēnei taumata kōrero te wā. We are going to also have just a wee peek back into the philanthropic landscape and what we found, and we have Dear Cat coming on. From there, we'll have our speakers introduce themselves. Again, it's a real blessing to have them on board here. They are leaders. They are leaders for us, but not only that, they are great and they're about inquiry. And not afraid to share the ups and downs of a journey in leadership and philanthropy. And then, of course, we'll have a bit of a panel discussion before hopefully we get to be able to gather in a few of your pātai that you might have and then next steps. Ka pai, is that us? Next hour and a half? Ready to rock? Ka pai. Ok, a koe Kat, maui te mata. Let's get going. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kate. Ko Kat Chowaniec toku ingoa, morena everybody. It's really awesome to have so many people joining us on the call, and just want to echo Kate's mihi to our guest speakers and to all of the people who informed and participated in this philanthropic landscape research. It was our privilege to hold conversation with many funders and communities and gather their wisdom around what it takes to work in partnership, in manner-enhancing partnership with community. My job today is really to share some of those headlines from the research. It's all available to read, and hopefully that you go away and deep dive into those resources, but I'm going to share some headlines from those today as a bit of a context for the panel conversation. So I'm going to bring up some slides here. So as Robin's already talked to, the kaupapa of the philanthropic landscape was really about identifying contemporary funding approaches and sharing, learning from the practice of funders who are grappling with these ways of working, with the goal overall to inform and influence more progressive philanthropy across Australia, particularly thinking into spaces where funders are interested in influencing systems change and working in more relational partnership-based approaches with their communities. So that's the context for today's webinar and for the philanthropic landscape in general. That was our purpose. And as Robin spoke to, there are 2 volumes to this. The first was published in 2009 as a review of international contemporary trends in philanthropy. And that really supported the Peter McKenzie Trust in thinking about what practices needed to be embedded in its 10-year strategy that was launched shortly after that. As Robin discussed, in 2023, we saw the Philanthropic Landscape Volume 1 being used and thought maybe it was a good opportunity to go back to it and understand whether anything had shifted. And what we actually found was that the practices in Volume 1 still very much rang true, very much held as being things that philanthropy in Aotearoa and beyond is focusing on. And so what we did instead was deep dive into the practices that supported mana enhancing partnerships and have a really deep look at what good, effective partnership between funders and community looks like in practice. And we did that by speaking to 10 funders for community organisations with which some of those funders partner to really gather their thoughts on what it takes to work in partnership. So providing a bit of a context around the 5 key trends from Volume 1, I think is useful to anchor the findings that we found in our more recent conversations about the practice of funders. So I'm just going to quickly walk through those. There were 5 overarching themes and lots of nuances to these, but the first trend that we identified was a focus on equity of funders prioritising their resources to the communities that experience the greatest inequity, and using both indicated data and community lived experience to inform who those communities are and what the issues were. Within the equity conversation, there's also a movement of funders thinking about how they address equity of access to their resources. So are their funding processes making it easy for all communities to reach into their resources? There's a lens there around diversity and inclusion. Are governance trustees and staff representative of the communities that the funder is seeking to support and serve? And to what extent are those communities represented in decision-making spaces? So there's a big space around equity. The second theme that we found was around power sharing and funders increasingly acknowledging the power hierarchies that exist in traditional philanthropy between the funder with the resources and the community seeking the resources. So funders working hard to disrupt that hierarchy, rethinking how their processes might support or change the power dynamics, moving to provide more unrestricted funding or more participatory models of decision-making around how funding is put into communities. And within this as well, funders becoming aware that they individually and as a collective have a significant amount of institutional power, and using their voice to harness change with and alongside communities. The third theme we found in Volume 1 was a focus on systems change. So funders moving from transactional grant making to treating the symptoms of issues towards being much more strategic with their resources and trying to address the root causes. Alongside that, building the community's capacity and capability to lead systems change, and acknowledging that the funding world is a system in and of itself, and working on how philanthropy improves its own system in terms of those issues around equity and access and power. The fourth theme was decolonising philanthropy. So funders beginning to ask difficult questions of themselves around their cultural competency, around how they give effect to Te Tiriti or Waitangi within their practice, how they might build relationships and trust with Indigenous communities, to what extent they recognise and value Indigenous knowledge and practice and invest in solutions that are led by, for, with and for Indigenous communities, and more increasingly thinking about how they share or see decision-making power to Indigenous communities. And the fifth theme was around adaptability and learning. So a trend around seeing funders being much more flexible in the types of funding approaches that they take, not just having a one-size-fits-all model of funding, shifting practice based on changes in their wider context or landscape. For example, in the event of disasters, or more recently, we've seen through COVID, that really causing a shift in practice. When working in partnership with community, being flexible within the context of that partnership as communities learn about what they need and how that changes over time. And also funders moving from focusing on accountability-based evaluation to much more learning focus around how can we make better decisions and achieve greater impact. So those themes provided the context of us going out and talking to funders about how are you embodying those practices in the way that you work with communities. And the theme that very much came through was around partnership, working in partnership with community and doing so in man-enhancing ways. I've got here a sort of an attempt at a definition of what we mean by man-enhancing partnership that we've put together on the back of this research, which is partnerships where the funder and community enact a culture of reciprocity, working together in service of a kaupapa or shared purpose in ways that ensure all parties have agency and voice, feel understood, are trusted, respected, and valued for what they bring into the partnership, and that the partnership uplifts everyone. So the questions we asked were, what can man-enhancing partnership look like in practice, and what does it take to get there? So in the report, you'll find 10 beautiful case studies of organizations who've gone on this journey and shared their wisdom with us, and we're really fortunate to have some of those here to talk to those today. But across those conversations, the job of Kate and I was to try and make sense of some of the characteristics or ways of working. So we've got 9, and these just look at, what does it take to work in man-enhancing partnership? So the first theme that we identified was really around humility and values-based practice. We heard from particularly trustees actually around letting go of ego, of acknowledging that communities hold the solutions, that funders don't have all the answers, being open to learning and listening to communities. A really important journey to go on at unpacking organizational values and making sure that once those values are clear, that they're embodied in practice and that the funder is accountable to them, and making sure that the way they work actually does reflect those values. And then this feeds into acknowledging that some of the practices that funders have and that they might have done for years don't actually serve or enable communities in the best way possible, and being brave enough to say, okay, what we're doing now isn't necessarily the best approach, and how could we move away to something more impactful for communities, which takes humility and courage. The second space we looked into was around trust and relationship building. Most of the funders we spoke to talked about taking the time for whakawhanaungatanga, for building deep connections, for waiting to be invited in and then listening and learning, showing up authentically, showing genuine care, taking time to build that trust, to be seen as legitimate in terms of partnership with community, and to build that mandate to have a relationship. And that actually takes significant investment in time and resources to build the capacity internally to have the skills to do that well. That's not something that you can do from sitting behind a desk. You need to have the people with the skills to go out there and build relationships. The third space we touched on was around having a deep focus on the kaupapa and on a purpose and on values. So we heard particularly from community we spoke to that the relationship with funders should be built around the shared values and shared purpose, and the funding should come later. Like, that's the enabling tool, but the relationship should be about the kaupapa, which means for funders that there's a mindset shift needed from, communities do the work to actually it's a shared responsibility that your two partners are working in a system to affect change. It also means funders needing to be willing to focus on what communities believe will be catalytic. So if there's a shared goal, kind of trusting that communities know how to make that goal happen and what's going to be most important for them. And in practice, in terms of what does this actually look like, we heard many examples of funders working with a more long-term focus, offering more untagged funding so that communities can determine how to use that, embedding non-financial support into the relationship, so not just about the money, and also investing in ways that are more holistic, recognizing the different intersecting issues that might be contributing to the thing the community is working on trying to shift. We heard really clearly the importance of having an intergenerational focus, that actually systems change is really complex, it takes time, and you're not going to get there with a 5-year strategy or 5-year funding commitment. We need to be thinking intergenerationally, committing to 10, 20 years plus, not just financially, but being in partnership for that amount of time. We heard from trustees that means they need to be comfortable investing in things where they may no longer be around to see the impact. So being brave to make decisions that you believe will reap the benefits for Mokopuna in the future. And we heard from Kaikoku, from community, that there's real value in funders offering explicit commitment to the partnership, even if the financial aspect of that needs more regular review. But just knowing that partnership's not going to disappear in 5 years' time, even if the money might look different, is really critical for community. We found this concept of healthy accountability. It talks to moving away from funding being a transaction towards all parties in the partnership having responsibilities and being really clear and transparent about what those responsibilities are to both the kaupapa, the purpose, and to each other. Being clear what showing up in the partnership looks like, and needing to have really transparent and open conversation channels to say, hey, actually, this isn't working for me, or could we do things this way? And for funders more broadly in an Aotearoa context, being really clear around what the funders' commitments to Māori and to Te Tiriti look like is something that we heard as being really important. Theme number 6 is around self-determination and agency, and this is really about communities being supported to determine what they need, what their aspirations are, and then being given time and space to develop solutions. It's not always about jumping in when there's a ready-made initiative, but actually supporting communities in the process of understanding what they need. This is also about trusting communities that they can do the right things in the right ways and that they know what it takes, and then supporting their capacity to lead the work and also embed the work so that it can be sustainable in terms of impact. We heard really clearly from funders shifting their thinking to acknowledge that community should determine what success looks like and how to tell their story of impact, and also that the impact is theirs to own and not the funders. And that's kind of a subtle shift, but really recognizing that the success is determined by community and not by funders. Within this explicit valuing of community wisdom and mātauranga, ways of knowing, ways of doing, and where possible within the context of the partnership, making sure decision-making is shared so that communities have agency, not just in doing their work, but within the partnership itself with the funder. Theme number 7 was around reciprocity. We heard really clearly that money-enhancing funding relationships are mutually beneficial. There should be an exchange of skills from both sides, exchange of knowledge. Communities have as much resource, knowledge, skills to offer to funders as funders do to communities, and that finding how the relationship can be mutually beneficial will support the kaupapa. And for funders, often this means knowing when to lead, when to stand beside communities, when to stand behind them, when to listen, learn, when to just get out of the way. Theme number 8 is a movement from funders working in allyship with community towards more of a coalition for change. So this looks like funders being really fierce champions and advocates for the kaupapa that they're working on alongside community, doing that with them, not for them. Also being brave to do direct advocacy. I think there's a whole spin out piece I think we're going to look at doing around advocacy, but certainly an acknowledgement that funders have a large amount of voice and influence, and stepping into that and speaking out to advance an issue is a space that we haven't seen enough of, but funders are starting to be interested in. And part of working in coalition is about funders opening up their networks and relationships and bringing community into those spaces. And theme number 9, last but not least, is a focus on learning and unlearning. So we touched on volume 1 about this shift of funders from accountability to being more learning focused. And we heard from the funders we spoke to that they're really looking to have reciprocal learning processes with their communities, asking questions that look at where are they getting traction together, what the funder's role has been in supporting impact, and what the funder could do better, more of, less of. So really moving away from, did you do what you said you were going to do, to we're in partnership here, how are we contributing to that partnership, what are we enabling or not enabling? And also within the space of evaluation and learning, we heard funders really talking about rethinking what counts as evidence and placing much more value on community and whānau narratives of them telling their own stories in their own ways. So it's a whistle-stop tour of what we found. There's so much depth of wisdom in the resource, and I do encourage you to look at it. The last word I'll leave here to lovely Robin, who in the foreword for the paper talked about the need to go on the journey, and it's going to be rocky and there's going to be uncertainties, but committing to the outcome of trying to support transformational change and greater equity in our communities is what it's all about. And so it's worth the discomfort of asking those uncomfortable questions of yourself and your practice in order to support ways of working that are more mana enhancing and more impactful for community. So I'll stop share there and hand back to lovely Kate, who's going to open up the corridor with our lovely speakers who can talk a lot more eloquently about what all this looks like in practice than me. So kia ora koutou.
Oh, kia ora, Kate. No, I think you did very, very well. I thought I had an opportunity to jump in, but I didn't really need to.
You know, I like to talk fast. Sorry, Kate.
It was wonderful. No, that was wonderful. And I guess a wee disclaimer, when we talk about being mana enhancing, it doesn't mean that we're fueling up mana for everybody. So just so we know, on the call, we all hold ourselves in our own mana. You know, we take care of our own mauri in all of this. But when we talk about mana enhancing practices, we're just wanting to talk about how we can add fuel, how we can advance, how we can accelerate, and how we can be more impactful or share learning. So that's the first disclaimer. Second is, and Kat did talk about this, I believe even with our speakers, and all of you on here today, actually I'm seeing some of the names and I get them fanning all over the place. We don't come in here just as funders, and I do mean just, or, you know, we have 4 speakers, for instance, that will be coming from a funding perspective and another from community. But, you know, when we see practice that is successful, it's when we bring our whole selves in. So again, I want to mihi to those who are sharing today, the fact that Niall may be the CEO of a foundation is balanced with the fact that he is a deeply committed community man, as are we all. So those are the 2 things I just want to lay down as a tuapapa, as a foundation for the kōrero moving forward, is that we acknowledge their whakapapa, we acknowledge the journeys of their own ancestors to make them the leaders they are today, and how that influences our practices when we are in service to different kaupapa. You know, we have kaupapa that we're all in service to, whether we're the ones fueling it up or whether we're the ones that are undertaking the heavy lifting and advancing our communities to thrive. So I'm going to hand over now to our 5 speakers. We have Niall, we have Maria, Gael and Jenn, who represent those who fuel up kaupapa, our funding communities. And then we have our Katie, who is zooming in from England, back in her homelands, who's on whānau kaupapa, who's going to share with us from community's perspective, you know, the impact of, or what, you know, mana enhancing practice actually looks like. So I am going to start in Taranaki with Maria. I'm going to hand it over to you first, please. Introduce yourself to our whānau on our call today. Kia ora, Maria.
Kia ora, Kate. Ko Maria Ramsay Takawingawa, he toi haitu, tēnei nā te HuiE Foundation, me te HuiE Foundation Holdings Limited. So I'm Maria Ramsay, I'm the Chief Executive at HuiE Foundation and HuiE Foundation Holdings Limited. We are one of 12 community trusts in New Zealand, so we cover Taranaki, a population of about 120,000 that we serve. So I'm just going to take you through a really quick version of our journey as an organisation and how we've changed over the last 8 years. So if when I think back to 2016, and Kate was there at the time, we helped facilitate a session with our trustees, and at that stage we'd carried out some research and we were looking at where we were as a region and what was happening, and we were trying to identify where some of the greatest need was. And our board agreed to a statement that if it works for Māori, it works for everybody. And that was really quite a turning point for us as an organisation, because it actually gave us the mandate to look at things in quite a different way. At the same time, that year we employed our first dedicated role to work with Māori organisations in the Māori community, which was our Manutahu Pūtea. So that was someone who would go out and work with organisations specifically in a kaupapa Māori way. And then moving on a couple of years later, we signed our first MOU with one of our iwi here in Taranaki. We now have, I think we've got 7 MOU now with the 8 out of the 8 iwi. And these MOUs, they don't have nothing to do with funding. They're purely about how we interact together, what our relationship is, how we're looking to have a reciprocal relationship that is mana enhancing, that we recognise what, although we may have money that we can, in Pūtea that we can share with people, we actually have a lot that we receive back as well. So these relationships have meant that we've been able to develop our own internal competency and capability as well, which I don't think we would have been able to do without those relationships. And it's so it's also opened doors for us as a foundation and an organisation. It's not just about us providing funding for those people. And in 2018, we also got our second dedicated position, which was Manutaku Whaihua Māori. So that was a role to work with iwi and Māori specifically at a strategic level. Then in 2020, we developed our new purpose statement, which is to build a thriving, inclusive and equitable Taranaki. And that was quite a shift for us as an organisation when we really started to focus on equitable outcomes. And so having a very clear mandate to look to fund to where there's the greatest need within our community. And so that puts a completely different lens on when you're looking at applications, and when you've got a budget of 10 million and you've got $20 million worth of requests. If you've actually got a lens that you can apply over it that looks at an equitable type of funding, I think that it actually it makes things easier in some ways to actually think about where your funding's going. We also at that stage developed a rangatiratanga strategy, and we were very purposeful about using the word rangatiratanga. So what we were wanting to do is to empower Māori aspirations, to actually look at not so much, sometimes it's quite easy as the funder to think about where you think the money should go, but we're not the experts in our community. We don't know where funding is needed and what's required. We're actually here to facilitate and to walk alongside people in their journey, but we're not here to tell people where they should be going and what they should be doing. In 2021, we rebranded. So we used to be called TSB Community Trust, which, sounds all quite corporate in a lot of ways. So we did a lot of work around thinking about what was our role in the community and where do we fit, and what sort of, what do we want to portray. And so we, through a subcommittee, which included mana whenua as well, we came up with the name HuiE Foundation. And it represents, it has 2 meanings. It means tip or summit, which is really appropriate for us here in Taranaki with Mount Taranaki. And then also it means origin and source. So what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to be able to provide what people need to reach the summit or the tip of where they can be, and we can be the original source of some of the pūtea to help them get there. And then we went into our actual logo design, and that's tukutuku panels. It's based on those. You can't make a tukutuku panel on your own. You have to have at least 2 of you to work together. So we thought quite a lot about our brand. So that was a big shift for us as well. And that happened in 2021, sorry. And that year we also launched a project called the Potama Initiative. And that's where we're working with, it's actually featured in the report, so I won't say a lot about it, but it's where we're working with 6 different organisations where they're given a lump sum of funding, 400k each, and they choose how they're going to spend it. So what they do is they go through an organisational assessment tool. This is not to be used for service delivery in any way. We still fund them for the work that they do, but this is all about building their resilience and capability as an organisation. And they can use it for anything from, they might want to build up their reserves. They might want to put in a new IT system. They might want to use it for governance training. It all depends on what comes out of the assessment as to where they want to focus. And then they develop a roadmap of where they want to get to in the next 4 years. And that's what that funding's for. So we're into year 4 of that project now, and the outcomes have been fantastic. It's been not just for where the organisations themselves have gone, but also because we bring them together about 2 or 3 times a year, depending on how the year's going, and they share with each other where they're at and what they're doing. And it means that they've shared policies with each other, they've shared advice, they've shared what's happened on their journey. So there's been some real synergies that have come out of that as well. 2022, we got our 3rd dedicated staff member to engage with Māori community, and that's Manutaku Āhua, and that's somebody to work at an even more strategic level. So the Manutaku Whāhua Māori role now can purely look at developing our ability to engage, and then we have someone who works with the Māori community at a strategic level and someone who works at them at a community level. The next thing that we did was we looked at how can we share some power with our communities. So we started a participatory philanthropy project, which is always really hard to say those words in one sentence. So it's now Te Aho Potiaki, and it's with the community here in Taranaki. It's the Pātea community, which has some significant hurdles to overcome. I think you could say quite a low socioeconomic area, and it's with a group of young people aged from 15 to 23, and they have a budget of their own that they decide they run their whole process themselves with the support from our staff, and they develop their own criteria around what they wanted to fund, what it would look like, how people would apply, how they'd make decisions. So they developed all of that themselves with support from our team, but we were not there to tell them how to do it. We were just there to facilitate. And so they've had their first year of grant making, which has gone really well. I think the key with that, though, is not just the grant making that happens out into the community, but it's actually the development of those young people as well, and the skills and things that they learn along the way. So we've now got a group of young people that have learned about conflicts of interest. They've learned about the difficulty of some decision making. How do you have to say no to someone in your community when it comes to funding? They're learning basic governance skills and learning how to assess and consider things. So we're actually helping to develop the next group of leaders for that community, which is a fantastic side component, which probably excites me more than the actual grant making. That's gone really well. So we're actually launching that again this year with another 2 communities. So we'll have 3 communities of young people that will be doing that. And we're using the Tuakana Taina model. So the young people that have been part of the first initiative will support the next 2 cohorts along the way as well. And I think one of the other things that we've had to do is, I think it's really important that you build your own organisational competency and capability, because if you don't do that, it's quite hard to engage in the right way. So with all those things that we've done over the last 8 years, when I went back and tried to pull some stats from in the last 5 years, our funding to Māori-led organisations has grown from 12% of our funding, overall funding, to last financial year it's sitting at 52%. So it's actually about, we increased our number of staff that we had that could engage with people. We looked at what some of our practices were. We changed the way that we look to the community so we don't look so corporate. And all of those things have culminated over that time and having better relationships. But it takes time. And I think that it takes time and resources. And you've got to be quite committed to not expect things to happen within, even within 12 months. You've got to actually take the time to get to know people, for them to get to know you, to build that trust and that relationship. And it's an ongoing journey, and we're a long way off being there yet, but we're pretty much well on our way. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Maria. Wow. So yeah. Ka pai. Thank you for that. That was a great in-depth introduction. I'm thinking I'm already going to change the questions to the panel discussion. Thanks, Maria. Kia ora, thank you. Okay, let's whakawhiti atu te moana raukawa. Haere ki a koe, Gael, PMP. Beautiful mahi, Maria. And Gael, up over to you now.
Kia ora koutou, ko Gael Surgenor aho. I'm involved with the Peter McKenzie Project, and I'm stepping in today for Lily Tuioti, who's the director of PMP, and I work on a very part-time basis supporting Lily. But I've been involved with PMP since 2016 when I joined the committee overseeing this initiative. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where PMP's travelled over the last few years as well. So Peter McKenzie Project is part of the J.R. McKenzie Trust. Peter McKenzie was a family member who wanted to apply a fund that he had towards a spend down fund over 20 years to make a difference to an issue that would make really positive change for New Zealanders. So after a period of exploration, a group of people decided to hone in on making a difference to child poverty and to have a systemic approach to that. So at that point, 2016, a new committee was formed to oversee this fund, and it was made up of J.R. McKenzie Trust trustees and a group of practitioners, community leaders, academics, people who had knowledge, skills and passion for the kaupapa of reducing child poverty. And I think that was the first move of power sharing and doing something different, because those of us that joined the committee from a practice or a community background, we weren't really there. We didn't see ourselves just as funders. We cared about the mission. And that had an interesting journey, because sometimes there were tensions between those representing J.R. McKenzie Trust with a funder hat on and those of us that were motivated by the cause. But over the time working together, I think that we learnt from each other and managed to navigate those tensions. 2017, we did something fairly conventional and put a call out for ideas, and that got 260 applications, and very few of them actually aligned with the mission of Peter McKenzie Project and had a systems change approach. Most of the applications were seeking grants funding for their services and programs, and I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for us to be really clear about how we were being different and to be realistic about a modest amount of funding with a long-term aim. We could really only fund a few initiatives. So out of that, and in total, Peter McKenzie Project, I think, has funded 9 initiatives to date, which is a small number. But it's also meant that we've been able to be more relational. And in 2019, we had our first collective HuiE, where we brought the committee together with the groups that had been funded. And out of that, thanks to Eru Tarena and Tokana Taraki, one of the initial recipients of a grant, this concept of a flotilla of waka heading towards the mission of reducing child poverty, or in a more strengths-based framing, enabling the well-being of tamariki and whānau, emerged. And that sort of set a culture of the committee and the kai kōkiri coming together and not being funders and grant recipients, but being together on this broader initiative, sharing values and a common purpose. And this led to, in 2021, one of our flotilla, HuiE, having a theme of how could we embrace a more participatory philanthropy approach. And that definitely had some elements of discomfort, particularly I think for the committee, as we thought, what does that mean? Does that mean the ngā kai kōkiri making decisions about the funding and the committee not having as much of a role? What did it actually mean? And what does it feel like to share power? And what about conflicts of interest and vested interests and the limited funding? But actually what came out of that was more that the kai kōkiri wanted to make decisions about strategy more than who got what resources. They really cared about where this initiative was going and how it was going to make an impact, and that we were all in it together. So those boundaries between funders and those receiving the funding sort of merged and blurred, and that was probably where it was a little bit uncomfortable. But as the relationship strengthened, I think we've found that that's only led to positive things. Some of the leaders of those initiatives receiving funding have joined the committee around the table talking about how does the flotilla expand a little bit? Who else could be part of this initiative? Where are we heading and how are we getting there, and doing that all together? We've also learned along the way that we have to be realistic about not putting more burden on the kai kōkiri, that we needed to be mindful of how to make the most strategic use of the extra time that they were contributing to the initiative. And they didn't necessarily want to be coming to every meeting, but we've had meetings where they've participated, and I think that we've been richer for it. One of the real turning points, I think, was in 2022 when the mahitahi stopped being facilitated by an external facilitator and rangatahi stepped forward. So from Tōkana Taraki and Waiora, two of the flotilla, rangatahi from those organisations facilitated that mahitahi. And what that also meant was the other organisations prioritised bringing rangatahi to the HuiE, and it had a completely different feeling and definite power shift of being more open to the youthful energy of Peter McKenzie Project collective. And that has continued, and the shared values and purpose, I think, between everyone involved has strengthened. And also what that led to was mahitahi not just being a sharing of what each group was doing, but a real interest in collective learning. And that's where I think it's really heading, is understanding that capacity building is really important and that they can do that together. The groups are actually starting to exchange and learn with each other outside of the mahitahi as well. So that reciprocity between the committee and the groups, and between the groups themselves, is well and truly alive. I think I probably should leave it there. But last point, really, I suppose, is that this is still an emergent process. We're learning as we're going, and we haven't ended up necessarily where we thought we were going to be in 2021 when we started with a more intentional participatory approach. But I think through the deepening of relationships, we're in a really good place and excited about where this is heading. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Awesome, Gail. And like just on that note, when you think about we're bringing in a generation of rangatahi coming in to lead, I just want to do give out a mihi, especially to Aubrey Bloomfield, who is Peter McKenzie's nephew, who's on the call at the moment, so that, you know, the mihi to whakapapa, to genealogy, and to generational impact, and that it's a thread and that we're part of this journey. So I just want to mihi to that. And so, you know, already with Maria talking about outreach, you know, working collaboratively with iwi, we have examples here already with Gael around participatory decision making and the challenges of that. So thank you very, very much. Awesome, Gail. So haere tonu tō tātou nei waka. We're going to head down to Ōtautahi now. Jen, kei a koe te wā. Kei a koe o Reba Meneti. Your 5 minutes is on. And go.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Jenn Chowaniec tōku ingoa. I'm Jen, and I have the privilege of being the General Manager for Wayne Francis Charitable Trust. We're a family philanthropic based and focused on Ōtautahi Christchurch. I've been with the Trust for almost 9 years, which is quite a long time in some ways. But I also sit on the board of 2 charities that are based in Ōtautahi as well. So I see this conversation from both sides, but mainly I'll be talking about our experience as a funder and how we go about that. So Wayne Francis Charitable Trust was established in 1999 by Wayne. He was a local farmer and businessman, and he died shortly after he set up the trust. He died of cancer and he lost his son to suicide. And those 2 things are 2 main factors that set up our focus around cancer research and young people that direct our giving. So most of our work is in the youth space, and we're increasingly using an equity lens in our decision making. And I think one of the interesting things about the Trust is that we have always had a relational approach to giving. We've never had an application form. Our process is more relational. We learn what we want to fund, and how we gather our information is really through talking to people. And early on in the Trust's history, the board understood that funders can have a role around brokering and convening conversations as well. So this has evolved for us into what we call a hybrid giving-doing approach to our philanthropy. So we're proactive and relational, and we have a focus on being connected at a grassroots level to enable systems change. So the case study that we contributed to the Philanthropic Landscape document is around one aspect of an ecosystem of programs that the Trust has been involved in for 9 or 10 years now. And the trigger for those programs was the Canterbury earthquakes. And one of my reflections there is that there often needs to be a trigger to force people to work differently and to change the ways that we've all been going about doing things. The Trust was invited to sit in a room with community, with other funders, with providers, to talk about community leadership. So everyone was there with a mutual interest around caring about community leadership. And the funding relationship came probably 2 years after that initial conversation in around 2014. So now there are currently 4 programs within that ecosystem, and the Wayne Francis Trust role has changed quite significantly over those 10 years. So my approach to just the next few minutes was really just to pull on a couple of threads of those practices, or the themes of practices that are in the philanthropic landscape, give an example of what we're doing now, and a reflection on that, because this has all evolved over time, and we sort of do something, try it, and maybe try and do it differently. So three of the main themes that I wanted to talk about. The first one is that trust, connection, relationship building piece, the whakawhanaungatanga, deep connection, being invited in and showing up differently. The example that I wanted to give for this is something that the Trust has only tried quite recently. We recognise that a lot of the relationships sit at a staff level. And what we wanted to do was try and include our trustees in some of that relationship building as well. So we now have an annual HuiE where our trustees show up and we invite all of our community partners and funding relationships and non-funding relationships to be in a room together for the purpose of whanaungatanga. Some people might call this an AGM, but because it has a whanaungatanga focus, we don't want to do any of that business. The purpose is sharing a little bit of our story and learning from others. My reflection on that is it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to be in these relationships. It takes a lot of time to coordinate events like this. It's not something, I think, that it's not that we don't approach every funding relationship or every piece of work in this way. We look to the ones where we can truly bring value by being so deeply invested and acknowledge that we can't do that with everyone. And it's not necessarily necessary to be that involved or that present or active in our work. The second theme that I wanted to touch on was that focus on kaupapa and purpose, and that the relationship is predicated on the purpose over the funding. And in the example of how this link ecosystems of programs came about is an example of that. We were part of an ecosystem that carried around community leadership. We were invited in around a table to have many, many conversations to start with because we had the existing relationships. And I think we've learned over time that the relationships are very, very helpful when the trigger or the disaster comes. My reflection on that point is something that's come up before already, that it creates some really blurry lines for us as funders. So as a funder, we need to have confidence in our approach. And there also needs to be a significant level of trust between funder governance and operations to enable us to enter into those rooms, go into those conversations and know how to commit or bring value without over-promising or creating challenges. The other part of this around focus on kaupapa is bringing non-financial support. And that's shown over the history of the link kaupapa. Initially, we came in bringing expertise, partners, brokering. Then we came in as a funding partner, and probably for the last 6 years, we've contributed in time only. The reflection here is similar, that it's a hard balance sometimes as a funder to choose which kaupapa to be in this way and which you can bring funding to, and that's just as valuable. And then finally, the other theme that I just wanted to touch on was around reciprocity, leadership and service, and that sort of mutually beneficial relationship. And I suppose it is a similar point in that we initially, in the link example, in the case study example, we gave our time and our expertise and our care. Then we gave our funding, and we were the fund holder of the project for the first couple of years until that was no longer needed. Now we mainly give time, expertise, but really leaning more into the advocacy and connections piece. And in terms of what we get, what do we receive by being in those relationships in this way? It's a deep connection to grassroots community. It's new relationships for us, and it's new learnings about what's going on at a grassroots level. And a reflection on that is, how do you, as a funder, value or talk about that non-financial support in a way where it can be truly valued, to make sure that it can continue to be gifted. We do this just by time recording and acknowledging that a lot of my time is not in managing funding documents, but in spending time with people. And it is one way to acknowledge that. I'll leave it there. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Yeah, kia ora, Jen. Again, so this focus of this introduction piece definitely on whanaungatanga, and I think there's another aspect to that, which your manaaki of the kaupapa and the people that you're working with. It goes hand in hand with your approach with your practice. So ka nui te mihi ki a koe, Jen. All right, we're going to whakawhiti te moana o tā poka a tāwhaki. We're going to head over the Tasman Sea now, over to Ghana lands. Ki a koe, taku brother Niall.
Morning, thank you. I'll try to keep this short and sharp, but yeah, thank you. Coming from the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains here in the south of this place. I just want to talk a couple of little mindset shifts and things that we're doing that underpin this, and maybe they can be unpicked, because who we are and what we do as a private family foundation, you can find a lot of that on our website if this is something that interests you. But I came into this role about 4.5 years ago, and I had this mindset around privilege that I just want to land, which is, you know, privilege as a dirty word at times. But for me, privilege as an individual or within a system or a structure, I often say is if we can look to create more space than we're taking up. So how do you use that privilege is actually really important. So with that mindset, we come into a foundation 4.5 years ago that needed to get really clear and build upon who we are and what we stood for, what we value in our work, and recognize the opportunities that the philanthropic privilege framework allows for us to do. And that wasn't just about shifting, and so I speak here, not just shifting of what we do, but who we fundamentally are, right? And we recently came back from a study tour of Aotearoa, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and there was this beautiful phrase, and I wrote it up on our whiteboard when we got back here, and I'll paraphrase it for this context, but is, how do you give expression to your values, was this beautiful phrase, and we've been reflecting on that, and I think this is what we tried to do. So if we got really clear about what we valued as a philanthropic foundation and holding community at the heart, we had to try to find a way to be true to that and give expression to that as a value. And for us, that was, what does partnering with the Aboriginal community of South Australia look like? And what is our role in doing that? And I'll jump to the end and then kind of reflect back on this a little bit. Where we've landed now over a very long 4-year, deeply trusted kind of relationship building, community engagement process is, we always recognized that we weren't the right people to be making decisions, but where we've got to is that we actually are not the right framework for those decisions to be made at all as well. So what we've helped create in that, using our privilege in deep partnership with community, is this idea that we can help create the establishment of an actual Indigenous-led fund itself. So we can actually shift our resources both on an annualized basis and on a corpus basis into the Indigenous hands, under a framework that has been designed by community, with community, for community, and is going to be run by community. So that was the way that we could best give expression to our values over a period of time. But that started with curiosity and a question and an offer, and not an expectation that we had a right to go into community and say, hey, we're private philanthropy, we've got this thing for you, how lucky are you that we're showing up on your doorstep? It was kind of like, hey, we want to be part of a change, and we have a role in that change making. What might that look like? And that's where we sat in deep conversation and trust and listening over a period of time. And that's where concepts like allyship to coalition really start to come out, because that speaks to us having different roles, as opposed to allyship at time can still speak to, we have something to offer you that you need. And aren't you lucky for us to be able to show up in that space? Not always, but that can be a connotation. So that coalition of changes, hey, we want to see this change together. What's our role in this? And I love that I've heard that word role said a number of times, because I think thus, as philanthropic funders, as not-for-profits, we need to dig in and unpack that concept of role and what we're best placed to do one another, and forming those coalitions of change, which are going to be really, really powerful. And so our role as a non-Indigenous organization is, we've got the decolonising role, right? Is looking at our practice first and foremost, and how we show up in community, and how we adopt a cultural learning strategy, and how we get better at decolonising and taking responsibility to change the sector from a non-Indigenous lens. And then we've got these beautiful set of partners with this Indigenous-led fund who are trying to re-Indigenize the systems. and I say this in two ways, and I won't speak for their work, because Warren and those that I work with speak to it really beautifully, but their first question is, what does Indigenous philanthropy look like under this Western construct, and how do we just make it work, right? Because there's a reality around the system of play now, and we got to operate within that. And so how does that look like, and how do we indigenize it? But then the second one is, how do we shift that construct itself as well, and fundamentally shift this idea that philanthropy is for wealthy people, passing benevolence onto others in good grace and humility. Yes, yeah, the tip the hat into, hey, from an Indigenous perspective, where the places are, we've been here tens of thousands of years. We're the first philanthropists. We're the first innovators. We are collective in the way that we think. We are intergenerational in the way that we think. And all of these things that you're grappling with as a philanthropic community about what good practice is, yeah, we nailed that stuff, right? We're really good. And I was about to swear then because I'm a cursor. We nailed that stuff years ago. So we've got an offer for you. How lucky are you? And that's the way that we've gone about our work. So I know I've jumped over a little bit there. I'm not trying to keep down to 5 minutes, but I think for us, the long and how our Indigenous enhancing philanthropy looks like wasn't actually just for us, and we have a role in that, but it was actually recognizing our privilege and helping to create a space where an Indigenous-led philanthropic foundation has emerged from that. And I'll say the one factor that we made, and I'll finalize this, and this is within the framework of us, but people ask us how we did it, because we made a choice to do it. It's that simple. We just made a choice to do it. Now, we all have different frameworks which we operate in, but we made a choice to do that and said, yeah, it's not going to be easy, or it's not going to be simple or fast, but it's the right thing to do. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Kate.
Kia ora, Niall, and I'll just reflect to paraphrase your partner, Warren, and the communities in the South, to say that in the relationships, you're not walking ahead of them, you're not behind them, encouraging them along, but it's alongside every step of the way. And so in the particular example that you gave around high trust, both ways, in a reciprocal way, was so important. And of course, you know, we talk about being collectives all the time, but that collaboration part is always where the knuckle and the real hard stuff is. It's the collaboration piece. It's the coalition piece where the hard work, you know, really, really happens. So, you know, e mihi aroha ki a koe, brother. It's good to see you on today. And so I'm going to just say introduction, because basically I think these guys were just scared of the gnarly questions I was going to ask them, but this kōrero has been so very, very rich. And so, and on that light, I just want to mihi to those 4 fueler upperers, to our funders, to those beautiful coalitions that are on today who've shared so far. And we're going to cross again the seas again and across many continents to get to you, Katie. And I'm hoping that you are awake still, you're still looking amazing, and we look forward to hearing from you around what mana enhancing practice looks like from the perspective of those of us in the community. Katie, kei a koe te wā.
Kia ora, Kate. Kia ora koutou, ka mihi nui ki a koutou, no ingarangi au, ko Romani te iwi, ko Katie tōku ingoa. I am joining you. Normally I'm based in Wellington, but I am in my childhood kitchen, having just been at my brother's wedding, which has been amazing. But yes, really jumped at the chance when Robin said, can you come along, even though I knew that it would be 2:10 in the morning as we speak, because how often do you get this chance to, you know, tautoko the work that's being done by all of you funders, encourage all of you who are listening in the work that you're doing, and to take part in this journey, and also recognising there are lots of my community sector colleagues on the call as well. And of course, I will miss things. I am one person representing one organisation, and we are so diverse in the breadth of the whole sector, and particularly recognising that for kaupapa Māori organisations and kaimahi Māori, they are facing particular inequities, and in those inequities include in funding. So those are quite different circumstances. I was really inspired though by the other speakers to share a little bit of a journey story as well, to be on trend, and also to say you are not alone. Many community organisations, including the one that I work for, are on te tiriti and equity journeys as well, and they do take time and they do take resource. So, there's, yes, funders need to go on this journey, and you have the power in the relationship, but also, the sector itself is doing that work too. So at HuiE, our job really is to weave collective voices to drive systems change for equity, so that communities, hapu and iwi, can do what they do best. So we're, in the sense, a little bit like Philanthropy New Zealand, but from the community side of things. We have a huge mandate, but we focus our tiny team on tier 3 and 4 charities. And what happens is that rōpū reach out for advice, for support, and a lot of that, to be honest, most of that is around how do we access funding? How do we write grants so that people will give us the money that we need? You're often quite, inaccessible to many, particularly the grassroots. And we found we publish, which might be useful for some of you, kōrerotia research. There's some that was out just later last year, which gives you a real insight into the hauora and well-being of the sector itself. And you'll see in there a lot of burnout, a lot of Māori rōpū in particular. There's the illusion that they're funded, but it's really a lot of volunteer support and koha. And Māori list grant writing actually is the highest type of non-financial support needed. So one of the things that we can do is offer individual support to, Kate's come to me and she said, I really need, we really need some support with grant writing, and we can support one-on-one. And that makes a bit of a difference. But what about the others? What about the others who don't reach out or who don't know that we exist? So a different approach would be to speak to funders, I guess, about the needs of community groups and ways of making funding more accessible and equitable. And perhaps that's what I'm doing right now. But a different approach still is to reduce that power difference, that power distance between grassroots and funders. And an example of this in the funding space is Te Taumata Toi Huarewa, which, I guess, imagine for a moment that you funders in the room have been invited in by mana whenua, by Māori community organisations, with no expectation of putia. And I guess often as funders, actually, that is why people start a relationship with you. And imagine instead being invited in to start a relationship and to have strategic conversations. Those conversations that we heard are the ones that, the community want to be involved in. And our Pou Arahi, Katarina Kupenga, did just this in Te Kaha. So the result of this has been that, because being invited in by community is quite a different approach, that it's, I guess, thinking about systems change from the grassroots to the funding sector, and really engaging with the community sector in how you do that is the power. That is the power. That is going to make the change. Because you can't do this by yourselves, and we can't do this by ourselves either. It's that relationship that's going to make the difference. And what they've done from that is come up with a framework that actually in that local community is really bringing about some of the change that we want to see. But what I will admit to you very freely is it's meant for our organisation that we're at a tipping point. So if we're going to be authentic and put into practice that mahi of that framework, it means shifting our whole organisation's approach to everything that we do. Rather than having Katarina doing her Māori project over here, actually that is the approach and the way that we need to be doing all of the things that we do. And obviously our next steps to roll out, there are you know, there's such potential now in the evaluation that we've done and the work that we've done. It's really exciting, and I encourage you to get in touch. And now I feel like the small and fragile community organisation in a room full of funders. But anyway, I did just want to really quickly leave you with trust in the people. Lived experience is expertise. Get to authenticity. And that takes a long time for people to be able to have an authentic conversation with you without trying to imagine in your head what you might want to fund. Connect and collaborate with each other. That would really help us. And by Māori for Māori includes the decision-making process. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Koino kamahiake ki ngā kōrero, ngā whakaaro rangatira e hora mai nei runga I te taumata o te wā. I just want to mihi to just the wisdom, power pearls of wisdom that have been dropped in this kōrero this afternoon. And Katie, when you're talking about power sharing and what I'm hearing all the way through, I feel like I want to reframe it into merely sharing the responsibility for the enactment of the kaupapa that needs to happen. That when we share responsibility, it kind of equalises us a little bit rather than talking about power, because that's what I'm hearing all the way through. When we're alongside our community together, when we are being active in making decisions in a participatory way, as Gael has outlined, and the challenges that come with that, because we're so used to a certain way of being challenged enough to change your whole system, your whole organisation to a certain approach to engage. When, you know, Maria started this all off, you know, when she talked about, you know, it took one phrase, it took the leadership of an organisation saying if it's good for one group of the community, it's good for all of us. And then having, you know, a real intentional laid out strategy to achieve that. And so I want to mihi to us all and with Jenn, you know, the manaki that comes with looking after those relationships, and all the way through this kōrero today, the other thing is that it's not been about the fuel, it's not been about the resource or the funds itself, it's having the meaningful relationship. And for that to be authentic requires, as I think we've heard from all our speakers today, this level of humility and whakaiti that I find to be very refreshing and very heartfelt. So ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. Like I said, they have managed to avoid all my gnarly questions that I was going to ask them because they shared so fully. So I would like to actually, because I feel like we've got the gazillion people on here with us, if there are any pārtai that have come through, anything you'd like to ask our panel, we'll be able to probably have time for a couple, and then we will need to finish up. But also I think that this is our first time doing this. I understand time is currency. However, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a wānanga over a number of hours and a shared kai, which might be something we can talk about when we think about next steps moving forward. So have we come up with any pārtai? Just pop them in the chat, please, if you have any questions, and I can just keep waxing lyrical about how wonderful this has been. Very, very clearly, the speakers had covered off certain themes that we had the privilege of gathering during the conversation. So, and during the collection of the stories for the landscape pieces. There was one, I'd read the one question about engaging with Te Ao Māori, and I think we've put up a link there from some of Maria's kōrero back from HuiE Foundation, and genuine, how do you have genuine MOUs or agreements with certain community groups, whether they be iwi, hapu, Indigenous peoples. But I always say it starts with a cup of tea. And it's not scary. It doesn't have to start with an MOU. It does always start with the relationship. So how about, I mean, people are quite interested in hearing about some of the key challenges? And I know, Gail, you talked about that specifically with the participatory decision-making pieces. What are some of, Niall, what's been a challenge for you along this journey into mana enhancing practice? What's been a key challenge?
Key challenge. Look, the context of the Indigenous landscape here is very, very different than in New Zealand. So, we have 400 plus language groups across the whole of the country here. We're talking 24 in South Australia. So representative decision-making bodies, and as you would have seen through our failed Voice to Parliament referendum, which is a sad indictment on the state of fear-mongering when it comes to, the role that Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people could play in the future of this place. But so that's been a real challenge for us, and something that we have sat with, and we've sat with our partners in for a long time, is what does good representative decision-making organisations look like, and within a philanthropic sense as well, where ultimately decisions have to be made around the allocation of resources. And so for us, handing over resources, time, energy, and support, and then for the group itself designing that model, that's something we've sat deeply in. But what has really unlocked our ability to work in that is actually looking within that generational framework that I was talking about, and how the centre of decision-making can rotate around the state, involve everyone, but rotate around the state and involve community in a really deliberate way. And they've come up with this concept, this biannual concept of what they're calling a gathering. And it's actually going to be held on different lands every 2 years across the state, and invite all of community, young, old, families in together to sit in a space across 3 days around a decision-making function, or what they call a determinating function, around what should be supported for the next 2 years, what is the strategy for the next 2 years, but also then an accountability model of what has been supported and resourced through this can actually be shown to community over 2 years, as well as the core group that are holding the Indigenous-led fund as well, having a rotating basis as well. So I think what I'd say is the hard point, what does it look like, and what the solutions we're leaning into natural Indigenous knowledge systems and what they've been able to come up with. And so that's the re-Indigenising philanthropy role that they've played, that we've had to embrace and bring back into the way that we think as well. So
how about you, Maria? Because you've been so intentional. 2016, it's been a while.
Sorry,
It's
I was
not
just
key.
reading the question that came up in chat.
Oh.
Yeah, that was quite interesting. I think that you just got to take time. You just got to really take time, and you can't rush things. And I think the question that was there too about, how does an MOU fit in the Te Ao Māori world? That was not the hi, really nice to meet you. Do you want to sign an MOU with us?
No.
That was sort of not how it went, and it was it came about over time again. But it also sets down some parameters and allows for expectations to be quite clear. We are a organisation that's maybe a bit different for people to deal with. So they can put expectations onto us. And if that's what the MOU is about, it's about both ways in the relationship. So if we're not fulfilling our side of the bargain, they can call us out. And I think that that's quite important too. It's not about funding at all. It doesn't have any funding linked to it.
Yeah, sure.
And the question that's in there now about, how do you deal maybe with those that you're not giving so much time to? If you're really clear on your strategy and what it is that you're wanting to achieve and the purpose, then I think that gives you a framework to work in again, because, if you're wanting to work with those in greatest need, you've got some particular outcomes that you're wanting to achieve, that starts to talk about where your resourcing and time should go. So, and you have to be prepared to say no. You have to be prepared to say no to some things to be able to do these things, because you can't do everything.
Gail, what about for you, perhaps a a key learning for you? Because it's been a shorter time for you on the journey, but it's, you know, it's been a lot to take in with the Peter McKenzie Project. What's a key learning to share with our crew as we get prepared to sign off?
I think a key learning is how you do things together, and whether that's how the mahitahi or the collective gatherings are designed and how they're led, what the priorities are for everyone in learning, and to really let the boundaries melt so that you're cultivating an environment where everyone is there for a shared purpose and having values and principles of that be the discipline, but not get into the dynamics that are so often present as the us and them, whether it's community and funders or community and government or different size, different communities. There's something about taking the time to build the relationships and trust so that the common purpose is what drives you.
And Jenn, for you, you know, what matters most in terms of these partnerships of purpose? You talked around manaakitanga and just the care that's taken. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or what matters most in these, you know, these partnerships of significance, their long-standing relationships that you nurture?
I think what matters most is understanding the role of the funder, and being able to identify that and how it changes over a period of time or a period of changing circumstance. The type of approach that I was particularly talking about isn't right for every situation. It hasn't been right for every moment in time in that particular relationship either. So, and I guess that's all coming, you know, the point of that is to really find how you're adding value, and if you're not adding value, to kind of get out of the way and perhaps just look at a different type of relationship with the kaupapa, with the organisation, with the collaboration. Yeah.
Katie, from your perspective,
Yeah.
can you add one more thing into the kete of little knowledge bombs you've been dropping, or one more thing before we hand it to Robert?
Just going back to that authenticity thing. So it's, I guess, even if you've got a really good relationship with somebody, it's a really vulnerable space to be in, to be opening up to a funder, even one that you're in a current relationship with, and saying, this is our, you know, this is our situation, or this challenge has come up. And it's only when you can do that I think, you know, that is a real test, you know, if you're able to do that and have a really good conversation about it. But it's a scary thing, and I think it's important to know as a funder that that is a scary thing for community organisations to do, because there's reputation on the line, there's, you know, relationships, there's expectations for community, and that's a tricky place to be. And the only other thing I would say is grassroots. So it's really easy to be thinking, okay, so we need to think strategically, we need to do systems change. That means big. That means, you know, we're doing bigger things with our money. And actually, systems change also happens at the grassroots. And I'd really encourage you to be thinking about how we're enabling that to happen as well.
Yeah, at our flex roots. Yeah, Robin, we are going to have to finish off in 60 seconds. But next steps, you know, what we're hearing today, it looks like we could definitely deepen and accelerate the work by having another type of convening, perhaps, which is a little longer. I mean, today was very, very special, and it just wasn't long enough. So, Robin, I'd like to hand it over to you to think about next steps, perhaps a couple of words before we finish up for today. But ka nui te mihi ki a tātou katoa.
Really inspiring. 2 words, really inspiring. Huge thanks to everybody. Thanks to everybody that came along to listen in. You've taken time out of your day. I like that phrase, Eileen, shared responsibility. My kind of nod to some of this that I put in the chat with you, Katie, was was we need to take trustees on this journey. And in the past, in our sector, quite often our trustees have thought that if we don't spend too much on our OPEX, if we don't have too many people, if we have fewer people, we can give more money away. And that's still a really laudable concept, but all of what's been spoken about today takes a really good investment of time on all people's behalf. And it's more time consuming to do our mahi well. I would argue there's a huge difference to be made as well as a result of that. So thank you so much, Katie, for holding us so well. Pat, for your presentation, your succinctness of this. This publication is available online, and we have a few copies in the office at Peter McKenzie Trust if people actually want a real life kind of paper copy if you're like me. And I'm going to hand the rākau back to you, Katie or Kat, to close us off, or Karinia, I'm not sure.
Well, look, hoi no kia koutou katoa, tēnā tū koutou katoa. Thank you very much for coming on today to our taumata kōrero o te wā. I'm sure there'll be more to come as we'll think about those next steps to accelerate and deepen the work. But a mihi to all of you and your mahi and the kaupapa, kei mua i te aroaro i tēnei wā. A lot of us are going to have to go bounce off and get back into HuiE, into rolling up our sleeves. So we're big mihi to you all, and I'm going to hand over Kat. I'm going to speak for us, so she won't mind that at all. Karinia, please, as you opened us up, could you please close us today? And
Kia ora koutou. Wow, I've got 3 words: rich, inspiring, kōrero, and that hour and a half. Well, thank you for holding us so well. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, Maria, Niall, Gael, Robin, Jenn, Katie, and of course Kat and Kate. It's been wonderful. I'll close us with our karakia, whakamiotanga. Okay. Kia tau kia tātou katoa, te ata whai, o tō tātou areki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhi tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene. Ka kite
No
ana.
ora mai rā, or haere rā, whichever one you're doing. No ora mai rā.